everybody. Thank you for giving up your afternoon on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. AVA Gallery thanks you for being here, and I'm sure Leah thanks you for being here. We're anxious to hear what Leah has to say to all of us, but before we do that, since I'm Trip Anderson, the Executive Director of AVA Gallery and Art Center, I have to pitch what's going on here, and there's lots going on. Our fall classes have started upstairs in this building, and more excitingly, workshops have started to happen in the Benta building, the Sculptural Studies building. We have an acoustics class today. We have a stone carving class today, and this coming week we'll have metalworking classes, several of them. So please look at our brochures, sign up for classes, and enjoy our galleries. In the meantime, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jen Lay, our exhibition coordinator, who will tell us a little bit about Leah, and then we'll hear her talk. Thank you very much.
So, Leah Woods received a BA in Art History from DePaul University in Illinois and an MFA in Woodworking, Furniture Design from Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. Her work has been shown domestically across the central and eastern United States and internationally in England and South Korea. Recent exhibitions include shows at University Museum in IUP in Indiana, Pennsylvania, Lehigh University Art Galleries and Zollner Arts Center in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, and at the Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Mass. Woods has received numerous awards and grants and has published her work in multiple magazines distributed throughout the greater New England area. Leah is currently an associate professor of art at the University of New Hampshire, where she teaches woodworking and furniture design. Regarding her work, Leah states, "My sculptural work over the last several years has predominantly been related to movement and feeling, acknowledging phenomena that are gentle or positive, such as the movement of air, wind, and birds in flight, or feelings that can be more threatening, such as changes in cultural attitudes. This work is about exploring those feelings of movement or change and giving form to that intangible experience." Please welcome me in please join me in welcoming Leah.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate Ava putting on this gallery talk. It's extremely helpful to have the opportunity to make work and then think about that work and then talk about what I'm doing. That helps me to figure out where my ideas are headed and where they're going next. So like Jennifer said, I finished graduate school in 2000. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology and I studied woodworking and furniture design. So for about the 10 years after I finished school, I made furniture. And I made a range of furniture from tables, chairs, desks. Mostly I made cabinets. This is a cabinet from a series that I created from about 2004 to 2007. And it's based on looking and thinking about cabinets as a stand-in for the human body. Some of the ideas that I had been interested prior to going to grad school ranged from fashion, femininity, psychology, gender, and it has been interesting to think and see along the way how some of those ideas have permeated my work. With this particular body of work, what I was thinking about was the cabinet structure as sort of analogous for a skeleton or a human body, and the panels, the doors, the drawers, the hardware used would be similar to clothes on a body, and the way the clothes change the body would be the way that those aspects, the panels, the doors, the drawers, would change the cabinet form. So this piece is called For Rose Burton, and Rose Burton was one of the dressmakers for Marie Antoinette. And she was the one that advocated for Marie Antoinette's larger-than-life hairdos and volumetric skirts and dresses. So I started thinking about if she had designed furniture, what might that furniture have looked like? So in this piece, I wanted to try to pick up on some of those aspects of clothing and making clothes in terms of the bolts on the side of the curved panels, thinking about buttons, and I made all of the hardware for these pieces. For that first 10 years, from about 2000 to 2010, as I was making furniture, I would usually make it in a series at a time, and each series would usually take a few years. Interspersed throughout that time, I would often get excited about a technique or a color or a form, and that would cause me to want to make a one-off piece exploring that particular idea. So that's exactly what happened with this piece. This is a vanity, and I was interested specifically in these coopered bent laminations. So if you look at the image on the right, the curved forms on the sides of the vanity and that go around the back of the chair, that's coopered bent lamination. So bent lamination, for anyone who's not familiar, is when you take thin pieces of wood, you put glue between each layer, and then you put that flat section of wood onto a mold, put that in a vacuum bag, which is like a freezer bag. You suck out all the air, and it compresses that wood around the mold, so that's how you're able to get a curved piece. In making a coopered bent laminated form, coopering simply means that you take individual curves, put an angle on each one, and then glue those together. So what you can end up with is this contrast, which I've sort of become really curious about, this contrast between these clean lines that you get with the coopering, this faceted pattern, along with the individual curves of each stave. So that was the aspect that I was interested in exploring with this vanity. And so when I created the curves, what I was imagining was this idea of what it is that a vanity allows a person to do, which is to sit down and transform themselves before they go out into the world. So whether it's putting on makeup or putting on particular clothing or doing one's hair, I was thinking about that psychological space where someone assesses what they think they look like versus the appearance of themselves that they want to present to the world. So in this piece, I created the bent laminated curves to create the feeling of almost a private space where someone could allow themselves to get into that vulnerable psychological place of beauty. So sometimes when I'm working on something that's kind of conceptually deep, I'll want to take a break because I'll be exhausted from thinking so much. And so this is a good example of just purely being interested in the form. So this was another one of these one-off pieces that I made while I was creating this series of cabinets. And I was interested specifically in these interlocking curved lines. This is still this technique of bent lamination, and I purely wanted to play with space, asymmetry, and these curved lines. As I was thinking about femininity and gender and clothing, that led me to begin to think about furniture that could offer a more particular and specific use for the user. And so that got me into thinking about shoes. So I made a series of shoe cabinets, and this is one in that series. So the flat horizontal panels, those hold high heels. So each one of there are about 7 cabinets in the series, and each one is specifically made for high heels. And so the flat shoes were intended to showcase the high heel, and then the diagonal curved panel underneath each flat panel, that was for the corresponding handbag. So that's the perfect pair. And what I was trying to convey, I was thinking about the idea of space and how could someone look at space and think about what would go there. And so I was thinking with shoes have a flat sole and a flat heel. Even high heel shoes, they sit flat on the floor, whereas the corresponding handbag, I was imagining that might be made of leather or fabric and might have a more volumetric form. So I wanted to create a space for the handbag that might be more reflective of the material. So it just had this wonderful forgotten feeling, and I thought for a while about what kind of furniture that I would make, and the more I started trying to bring in some of my previous interests in clothing and gender and femininity and fashion and all of those things slowly began to culminate in the idea of mannequins and dress forms. And so that led to a new series of mannequins. These are all about life size, about 5 feet. And they're looking at the idea of hand sewing clothing and specifically undergarments. And the two ideas that I was specifically interested in at the time were women's undergarments and armor, men's armor. And while those, like on the surface, seem a little bit different, what I was intrigued by was thinking about what those two things do, both for men and women. And of course, there were some women that wore armor, and there are some men that wear corsets and girdles and stuff like that. But I think generally we think about men in armor and women in undergarments, and in both cases, what they can do is create a shape of the body that doesn't actually exist, make things bigger. If they are actually smaller, make things smaller. If they're actually bigger, and they can both be very beautiful with the craftsmanship, the material, the construction, and so I was thinking about both of those things, both armor and undergarments, as I was making these structures. And with this piece, I was looking a lot at trench coats, and with one of the things that I'm interested in, which is tangentially connected to my work, is I love to travel. I love to get to know different cultures and people, and there's so much emphasis on how we are different. We are different from other people in other communities in our state. We are different from other parts of the country. We're different from other parts of the world. And it's so interesting to me to be able to travel and see how much similarity there is. And in this specific case, what I was thinking about was, in terms of fashion, there's this wonderful thing that happens with women's necks and clothing, and in the Western world, oftentimes we see this in trench coats or dresses that will have a collar that will come up, and what it's doing is creating this transition from the head to the neck. But you see this in lots of different cultures with different kinds of collars and necklaces and beadwork. This was a piece where I was thinking a little bit more specifically about the articulation of armor and how pieces, plates in armor will fold around each other in order for the person to be able to move with the plated armor on. So I was sort of imagining here someone being able to move and imagining what those pieces, these are all bent laminated pieces of wood, and imagining how those pieces would move within the structure of the breastplate. But here I was continuing to think about this idea of this neck and the transition of the head to the shoulders. And I think probably most people are familiar with the images of women in Burma who wear the brass rings that look as though they elongate the neck. And of course what they do is compress the collarbone. But the purpose is to give that to essentially like put the head on a pedestal, to raise that head, to lower the body, again to create that that transition from the head to the shoulders, but also with this idea of it being a beautiful presentation. And so I was really enjoying thinking about that as being explored in different cultures. This is not a piece that I made. This is a stick chart from Micronesia that's in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The reason I show it is because this is one of the few pieces that has been hugely influential in my work in terms of helping me to understand what I have been doing and then giving me guidance as to how to continue to make work in the future. And this was one of those light bulb moments, which probably everyone has had, where you have an experience and you're like, oh, wow, so that's what that means, or that's what I'm doing. So I visited this piece in the African and Oceanic collection of the Met probably a dozen times, and I would always go to the museum, go downstairs, see this piece, and then see whatever else I wanted to check out in the museum. And it wasn't until I had spent years looking at this piece that I finally took the time to stop and to read the description to figure out exactly what it was. I was just intuitively drawn to the form. And what's happening here is that this is a map, and it's a map that the fishermen in Micronesia would memorize so that when they went out fishing, they would know the currents of the waves. So you see the straight, the vertical lines and the horizontal lines. Sometimes in these stick charts you'll see tiny shells that are wrapped with leather, and those indicate where islands are. And the curved lines indicate the current of the ocean. So when the fishermen would set out from an island, they would know exactly where they were in relationship to that map. So if they wanted to put out nets and then drift, they would be able to drift into the island in order to dock. And what I was so struck by when I finally took the time to read what this piece was that I thought, oh my God, this is not a map that talks about where the islands are geographically. This is the experience of what being in the ocean feels like and being led by the waves, what that feels like. And I realized that that's what I had been wanting to do with my furniture, is to create an experience of what it would feel like to sit at vanity, be enclosed by a circular component and feel like you're in a safe space. Or what it would feel like to put away shoes in a cabinet and then be able to stand back and see the organization and to appreciate the beauty of the material of the shoe versus the space that it was positioned in. And so I had seen this stick chart. I was super excited about thinking about the experience of what a map could convey. And I was invited to be in this show called Bartram's Boxes. And it was about John Bartram. John Bartram is considered to be is considered to be North America's first botanist in the 1750s. And so the show was all about him. And So what this map is the experience of the traveling of information. So what that means is that John Bartram lived in Philadelphia, and what he would do is he would travel up and down the East Coast and a little bit through the South, and he would collect samples of plants and flowers. He would do drawings. Sometimes his son would join him, and then they would collect samples from people that they met along the way. So this piece is called In and Down and Up and Out. So on the left side, what you have is the eastern coast of the United States, and everything is culminating and coming together in the middle of the left side. And then when John Bartram collected his information, he sent it to London. And so this is the east coast of the US, and this is Philadelphia. And when he collected all of his information, plants and flowers, the drawings and the descriptions, he sent it to London, where that information was published. He was paid, so money came back to him, as well as publications of his work came back, but then that information also went up and out into the world and went on to influence other people. So thinking about what does it look like when information travels was essentially what I was thinking about with this piece. And that idea of phenomena and feeling phenomena and experience is basically what has led me to where I am today. This is a piece, it's about 6 feet in diameter, and it's called Distraction. And this one is about the idea of the push-pull of when you want to get close to something or a person or a situation to understand it better, but then wanting to step back, literally or figuratively, to understand that person or that situation in context. And so that pull and that push between getting closer and moving back. This is another piece about the idea of phenomena and feeling and experience, and this one is called Off Course. And this piece is organized around the golden rectangle. So the golden rectangle or the golden section is a mathematical relationship of the longer part of the rectangle to the shorter part of the rectangle is 1 to 1.6. So it's a relationship of numbers. So the golden rectangle is a rectangle in which there are multiple squares, and within each square, if you draw the radius, you can create a spiral, and the spiral is what we find in seashells and sunflowers, and so the idea with this piece is that the vertical and horizontal elements are creating the golden rectangle, and then the curved pieces are essentially doing their job. They're following along the squares, they're creating the radii of all of the squares, and as they continue to spiral around the form, they're doing what they're supposed to do, they're moving out into the world, but then at some point, all of a sudden they look back and they go, uh-oh, because they've made intentional choices, but those intentional choices got them a little bit off of where they meant to go. So it was sort of an exploration and thinking about experience that's not necessarily good or bad, but the idea of projecting where you might be by doing something or following certain rules, and then sometimes life gets in the way and causes things to get derailed or changed, which isn't necessarily positive or negative, but more of a phenomena of being. This is a piece called Migration, and this was one where I was thinking about movement. The table is about 6 feet long, and with this piece I was thinking about a couple different kinds of movement. And one of them was the idea of being able to sort of understand how something is moving forward without it being super clear. For example, Has everyone seen when birds fly in a V formation in the sky, and you can see them traveling forward, but then a couple of them get out of the V, and then they get back into the V, but then the V sort of turns, and you're like, I thought you guys were going that way, and it seems like they're sort of going in a general direction, but the general direction seems to be a little bit indirect sometimes. So there was that aspect of movement, but then the other aspect I was thinking about was looking at a field and knowing that wind, or understanding that wind is coming through the field by the fact of the grass being blown down. And it was that thought and that sense of you can't see the wind, but you see the after effect of it that was the most sort of influential thought when I was making this piece. You see the after effect, you don't see the actual force. And this is the last image that I have. That idea led me to this piece. This is called A Way to Move Forward. And this is only 6 inches in diameter. It fits within a 6-inch cube. And this piece came about, and actually all of the pieces in the gallery came about as a result of leading up to the presidential election in 2016 in the aftermath of the election. And the way that this piece developed was I was intrigued and concerned, as I think a lot of people were, about the rhetoric that led up to the election, and then thinking by the time the election happened, is this going to happen peacefully? Are people going to be able to maintain composure, maintain a calmness? And then immediately after the election, there were so many calls that I heard for reconciliation, for now let's heal, now let's come together. And so this was thinking about that, thinking about trying to recreate the whole, thinking about the stronger protecting the weaker, trying to recreate this solid form. And from that piece, I got to this piece right here, where I was actually questioning whether that solid form is going to be able to come back together, or if it's in the process of falling apart. And it's the uncertainty of the action that's happening that is what is going on with these veneered pieces here. They all came from that same time when I was thinking about when a phenomena happens and we feel it, we're certain that it is going on, but it doesn't have a physical manifestation. And it's sort of like when you walk into a room and you can feel tension, and you know that tension is there, you're 100% certain, but that tension doesn't have a color or a texture or a material or a weight. And so thinking about if those phenomena, if those feelings could have a form, what would that form look like? And what happens when it gets to a point where you feel like something is at the precipice and it's either going to dissipate and be calm, or it's going to explode and something more intense or violent or destructive is going to occur. So on that happy note, that is all that I have. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it.